On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, President of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. All praise be to Allah, the Lord of the universe, and peace and blessing be upon our Master and Prophet Muhammad and his pure household, his noble companions, and on all divine messengers. O God, hasten the arrival of Imam al-Mahdi and grant him good health and victory, and make us his followers and all those who attest to his rightfulness. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am grateful to the Almighty Allah who granted me once more the opportunity to appear before this World Assembly. I have the pleasure to express my sincere thanks to His Excellency Joseph Dace, President of the 65th session, for his tremendous efforts during his tenure. I also would like to congratulate His Excellency Nasser Abdul Aziz on his election as the President of the 66th session. Let me seize the moment to pay tribute to all those who lost their lives during last year as a result of natural disasters, particularly to the victims of tragic famine in Somalia and the devastating flood in Pakistan. I urge everyone to increase their assistance and aid to the affected populations in these countries. Over the past years, I spoke about different global issues and the need to introduce fundamental changes in the current international order. Today, considering the international developments, I will try to analyze the present situation from a different angle. All you know, the dominance and superiority of human beings over other creatures lie in the very nature and the truth of humankind. This is a divine gift and a manifestation of the divine spirit, embodying faith in God, who is the everlasting creator and planner of the entire universe. Showing compassion to others, generosity, justice-seeking, and having integrity both in words and in deeds. The quest for dignity to reach the pinnacles of perfection, the aspiration to elevate one's material and spiritual status, and the longing to realize liberty. Defying oppression, corruption, and discrimination in contrast to supporting the oppressed. Seeking happiness and lasting prosperity and security for all. These are some of the manifestation of common divine and human attributes, which can clearly be seen in the historical aspirations of human beings as reflected in the heritage of our search for art and literary works, both in prose and poetry, and in the socio-cultural and political movements of human beings in the course of history. All divine prophets and social reformers invited human beings to tread on this righteous path. God has given dignity to humankind to elevate his status, to assume his successor role on earth. Dear colleagues and friends, Mr. President, it is vividly clear that despite all historical achievements, including creation of the United Nations, that was a product of untiring struggles and efforts of free-minded and justice-seeking individuals, as well as the international cooperation. Human societies are yet far from fulfilling their noble desires and aspirations. Most nations of the world are unhappy with the current international circumstances. And despite the general longing and aspiration to promote peace, progress and fraternity, wars, mass murder, widespread poverty, and socio-economic and political crisis continue to infringe upon the rights and sovereignty of nations, which leave behind irreparable damage worldwide against all nations in the world. Approximately 3 billion people of the world live on less than $2.5 a day, and over 200 million people even live without having even one sufficient meal on a daily basis. 40% of the poorest world populations only share 5% of the global income, while 20% of the richest people share 75% of economic earnings worldwide. More than 20,000 innocent and destitute children die every day in the world because of poverty. 80% of financial resources in the United States are controlled by 10% of its people, while only 20% of such resources belong to the 90% of the population. What are the causes and reasons behind these inequalities? How can one remedy such injustice? Those who dominate and run centers of global economic power put the blame on people's aspiration for religion and the pursuit of the path of divine prophets, or on the weakness of nations and the ill performance of a number of groups or individuals. They claim that only their views, approaches, or prescriptions can save humanity and the world economy. Dear colleagues and friends, don't you think that the root cause of the problems must be sought in the prevailing international order or the way the world is governed? I would like to draw your kind attention to the following questions. Who abducted forcefully tens of millions of people from their homes in Africa and other regions of the world during the dark period of slavery, making them a victim of their materialistic greed in the United States and in Europe? Who imposed colonialism for over 4 centuries upon this world, and who occupied lands and massively plundered resources of other nations, destroyed talents, and alienated native languages, cultures, and identities of nations, who triggered the First and Second World Wars that left 70 million killed and hundreds of millions injured or homeless, who created the wars in the Korean Peninsula and in Vietnam, who imposed, through deceits and hypocrisy, the Zionists, and over 60 years of war, homelessness, terror, and mass murder on the Palestinian people and on countries of the region, who imposed and supported for decades military dictatorships and totalitarian regimes on Asian, African, and Latin American nations, and established friendly relations with all of them, who used atomic bomb against defenseless people and stockpile thousands of warheads in their arsenals, whose economies rely on waging wars and selling arms, who provoked and encouraged Saddam Hussein to invade and impose an 8-year war on Iran, and who assisted and equipped him to deploy chemical weapons against our cities and our people, who used the mysterious September 11th incident as a pretext to attack Afghanistan and Iraq, killing, injuring, and displacing millions in 2 countries, with the ultimate goal of bringing into its domination the Middle East and its oil resources, who undermined the Bretton Woods system and printed trillions of dollars without the backing of gold reserves or equivalent currency, a move that triggered inflation worldwide and was intended to prey on the economic gains of other nations. What country's military spending exceeds annually $1,000 billion, more than the military budgets of all countries of the world combined? Which governments are the most indebted ones in the world, and who is the government that threatens all nations and countries with any excuse? Who dominates the policy-making establishments of the world economy? Who are responsible for the world economic recession and are imposing its consequences in the United States and in Europe, on Asia, Africa, Latin America, and all other nations? Which governments are ever ready to drop thousands of bombs on other countries, but ponder and hesitate to send a bit of food aid to famine-stricken people in Somalia or in other places? Who are the ones dominating the Security Council, which is ostensibly responsible to safeguard the international security? There exist tens of other similar questions, and of course, the answers are clear. The majority of nations and governments of the world have had no role in the creation of the current global crisis, and as a matter of fact, were themselves the victims of such policies. It is as lucid as daylight that the same slave masters and colonial powers that once triggered the two world wars have caused widespread miseries and disorder with far-reaching effects across the globe since then. And they continue to control the international political centers and the Security Council. Dear colleagues and friends, do these arrogant powers really have the competence and ability to run or govern the world? Or is it acceptable that they call themselves as the sole defender of freedom, democracy, and human rights, while they militarily attack and occupy other countries? Can the flower of democracy blossom from NATO's missiles, bombs, or guns? Ladies and gentlemen, if some European countries still use the Holocaust after 6 decades as the excuse to pay fine or ransom to the Zionists, should it not be an obligation upon the slave masters or colonial powers to pay reparations to the affected nations? If the damage and losses of the period of slavery and colonialism were indeed compensated, what would happen to the manipulators and behind-the-scene political powers in the United States and in Europe? Will there remain any gaps between the North and the South? If only half of the military expenditures of the United States and its allies in NATO is cut to help solve the economic problems in their own countries, will they be witnessing any symptom of the economic crisis? What would happen if the same amount is allocated to poor nations? What is the justification for the presence of hundreds of U.S. military and intelligence bases in different parts of the world, including 268 bases in Germany, 124 in Japan, 87 in South Korea, 83 in Italy, 45 in the United Kingdom, and 21 in Portugal, and hundreds of bases in other parts of the world? Does this mean anything other than military occupation? Don't the bomb deployed in the state bases undermine the security of other nations? Ladies and gentlemen, the main question is the search for the root cause of such attitudes. The prime reason should be sought in the beliefs and tendencies of the establishment. An assembly of people in contradiction with the inner human instincts and disposition, who also have no faith in God and in the path of the divine prophets, replaced their lust for power and materialistic ends with heavenly values. To them only power and wealth prevail, and every attempt must bring into focus these sinister goals. Oppressed nations have no hope to restore or protect their legitimate rights against these powers. These powers seek their progress, prosperity, and dignity through the poverty, humiliation, and annihilation of others. They consider themselves superior to others, enjoying special privileges or concessions. They have no respect for others and easily violate the rights of all nations and governments. They proclaim themselves as the indisputable custodians of all governments and nations through intimidation, recourse to threat and to force, and the abuse of international mechanisms. They insist on imposing their lifestyle and beliefs on others. They officially support racism. They weaken countries through military interventions and destroy their infrastructures in order to plunder their resources by making them all the more dependent. They sow the seeds of hate and hostility among nations and people of different pursuits in order to prevent them from fulfilling their goals of development and progress. All cultural identities, lives, values, and wealth of nations, human values, women, children, and the youth are sacrificed by their hegemonistic tendencies and the inclination to enslave and captivate other nations. Hypocrisy and deceit are allowed to secure their interests and imperialistic intentions. Drug trafficking and killing of innocent human beings are also allowed in pursuit of such diabolic goals. Despite NATO's presence in the occupied Afghanistan, there has been a dramatic increase in the production of illicit drugs in this country. They tolerate no question or criticism, and instead of presenting a reason for their violations, they always put themselves in the position of a claimant. By using their imperialistic media network, which is under the influence of colonialism, they threaten anyone who questions the Holocaust and September 11th with sanctions and military action. Last year, when the need to form a fact-finding team to undertake a thorough investigation concerning the hidden elements involved in September 11th incident was brought up, an idea which is also endorsed by all independent governments and nations as well as by the majority in the United States, my country and myself came under pressures and threats by the government of the United States. Instead of assigning a fact-finding team, they killed the main perpetrator and threw his body into the sea. Would it not have been reasonable to bring to justice and try openly the main perpetrator of the incident in order to identify the elements and reason behind the safe space provided for the invading aircraft to attack the twin World Trade Towers? Why should it not have been allowed to bring him into trial to help recognize those who launched terrorist groups and brought wars and other miseries into the region. Is there any classified information that must be kept secret? They view Zionism as a sacred notion or ideology, and any question concerning its foundation and history is condemned by them as an unforgivable sin. However, they endorse and allow sacrilegious and insult against beliefs of other divine religions. Dear colleagues and friends, real freedom, justice, dignity, well-being and lasting security are the rights of all nations. These values can neither be achieved by reliance on the current inefficient system of world governance nor through the intervention of the world's arrogant powers and the gun barrels of NATO forces. These values could only be realized under independence and recognition of others' rights and through harmony and cooperation. Is there any way to address the problems and challenges besetting the world by using the prevailing international mechanisms or tools to help humanity achieve the long-standing aspiration of peace, security, and equality? All those who try to introduce reforms whilst preserving the existing norms and tendencies have failed. The valuable efforts made by the non-aligned movement and Group 77 and 15, as well as by some prominent individuals, have failed to bring fundamental changes, although they had their own effects and impacts. Governance and management entail fundamental reforms. But what has to be done now? Dear colleagues and friends, efforts must be made with a firm resolve and through collective cooperation to map out a new plan on the basis of principles and the very foundation of human universal values such as monotheism, justice, freedom, love, and the quest for happiness based on happiness for all. The idea of creation of the United Nations remains a great and historical achievement of mankind. Its importance must be appreciated and its capacities must be used to the extent possible for our noble goals. We should not allow the organization, which is the reflection of the collective will and shared aspiration of the community of nations, to deviate from its main course and play into the hands of the world powers. Conducive ground must be prepared to ensure collective participation and involvement of nations in an effort to promote lasting peace and security. Shared and collective management of the world must be achieved in its true sense and based on the underlying principles enshrined in the international law, and justice must serve as the criterion and the basis for all international decisions or actions. All of us should acknowledge the fact that there is no other way than the shared and collective management of the world in order to put an end to the present disorders, tyranny, and discriminations worldwide. This is indeed the sole way to prosperity and welfare of human society, which is an established and vivid truth. While acknowledging the above truth, one should note that it is not enough, and that we must have further faith in that and spare no effort towards its realization. Dear colleagues and friends, shared and collective management of the world is the legitimate right of all nations, and we as their representatives have an obligation to defend their rights. Although some powers continuously try to frustrate all international efforts aimed at promoting collective cooperation, we must, however, strengthen our belief in achieving the perceived goal of establishing a shared and collective cooperation to run the world. The United Nations was created to make possible effective participation of all nations in international decision-making processes. We all know that this goal has not yet been fulfilled because of the absence of justice in the current management structures and mechanisms of the United Nations. The composition of the Security Council is unjust and inequitable. Therefore, changes and structuring of the United Nations are considered as the basic demands of the nations that must be addressed by the General Assembly. During last session, I emphasized the importance of this issue and called for the designation of this decade as the decade of shared and collective global management, and that all capacities and resources must be mobilized in that direction. Now I would like to reiterate my proposal, and I am sure that through international cooperation, efforts of committed world leaders or governments, and through insistence on justice and the support of all other nations, we can expedite the building of a common, bright future. This movement is certainly on the rightful path of creation, with the assurance of a promising future for humanity. A future that will be built when humanity initiates to tread the path of the divine prophets and the righteous under the leadership of Imam al-Mahdi, the ultimate savior of mankind and the inheritor to all divine messengers, leaders, and to the pure generation of our great prophet. Creation of a supreme and ideal society with the arrival of a perfect human being who is a true and sincere lover of all human beings is the guaranteed promise of Allah. He will come with Jesus Christ to lead the freedom and justice lovers to eradicate tyranny and discrimination and promote knowledge, peace, justice, freedom, and love across the world. He will present to every single individual all the beauties of the world and all good things which bring happiness for mankind and which gives the promise of a better tomorrow to all humanity and the sweet taste of life to all. Friends and colleagues, today nations have been awakened, and with the increase in public awareness, they no longer succumb to oppressions and discriminations. The world is now witnessing more than ever the widespread awakening in Islamic lands, in Asia, in Europe, and in America. Every day, these movements are ever expanding. Every day, their specter and influence to pursue the realization of justice, freedom, and the creation of a better tomorrow. Our great nation, and our nation that built a great civilization and history, stands ready to join hands with other nations to march on this beautiful path in harmony and in line with the shared aspirations of mankind. Let us salute love, freedom. Let us salute justice and knowledge, and let us salute the bright future that awaits humankind. I thank you all, ladies and gentlemen.
باسم
On behalf of the